Yes. Spock and McCoy. What a great team they were. Great, great stuff. And it was a lot of fun. And went back to my childhood days thinking about Star Trek. I give the Vulcan salute to Jacob Hornberger. Jacob, thank you so much. And my sincerest apologies. I thought the email had gone through, and occasionally I get this glitch on MSN where you hit send and it doesn't go, and then you get this little symbol. And unless you're on that tab, you don't know that the thing hasn't gone out. Thank you so much for joining us, Jacob. It's great to have you here.
Gard, it's always an honor and a pleasure and a very enjoyable and inspiring experience to be with you. So thank you for having me on.
And no headaches from the Vulcan Mind Meld tonight.
No, I'm getting accustomed to it. It's really interesting. Now, it helps that I'm, taking about 10 aspirin beforehand, but
yeah, I'm thinking about how much painkillers I'll be needing pretty soon, covering all these news stories. But it is a very interesting thing. You probably heard my comments, Jacob. I love this grounds up sort of populism without the William Jennings Bryan populist motif, where it is a ground up, do it yourself sort of a thing. And people who are interested in certain subjects, they're experts on these things, they can present their information. And one of the areas of which you are really expert is the JFK assassination. And we're going to discuss this in part 2 of our presentation tonight. And you're pretty much going to be our instructor here, offering us some of your great research. We're going to talk about some of your book releases where people can go to do their own reading on this. But I think it's okay to ask you, and I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot a little bit here, to ask you about your thoughts on the move in the NDAA, this incredibly burdensome every year National Defense Authorization Act on the House side, to slide in this now known as Section 219, which would integrate the United States and Israeli arms firms, because it does sort of tie into this many decades long post-World War II national security deep state that you've been fighting for so long. What are your thoughts on this? It seems to me that it's going to pass, and I think the reason they're trying to get it in is they want to plant these businesses inside the states so people will look at it much like the military bases. They won't want to shut them down in the states.
Well, I'm not really an expert in this area. I mean, I've read a little bit about them trying to merge with the Israeli government. If that's true, obviously, it would be a bad thing. But let's face it, the Mossad and the CIA have been joined at the hip for a long time. But that's why I have, for many years, Gard, not really delved into the details of what they're doing at any particular time, but trying to raise people's vision to how evil this governmental structure is.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing, raising people's attention to what they're doing here or doing there and doing there is fantastic. But what I do is I try to raise people's vision that we should never have adopted a national security state form of government.
Yeah.
I think it was the worst mistake in American history. We had a very fine limited government republic, and that got destroyed by the national security state. So I'm not really expert on the details of what they're doing at any particular time, but I am an expert on why Americans need to dismantle this evil structure, very destructive, very dangerous structure, and restore a limited government republic. So I apologize to you, but I'm just not up on all the details of what's going on the inner workings of this thing.
Well, it pulls back the curtain on where we're looking to go. And you also saw how I was covering some of the information about the immigration police state. Before we go into the JFK assassination subject, I would like to ask you, I was bringing up the point that I thought was terrific. And, I was cued in thanks to your morning email, which is always so great, from FFF.org, into that piece over at Substack, by Radley Balco, talking about, hey, let's think about suing people like Stephen Miller. I do think that if they were to have some sort of statutes that they would present, they would run into some conflicts of ex post facto laws, but they already have 14th Amendment violations that they could bring up against people like Miller, violations of due process that they could bring up. What are your thoughts on the possibility of what, Balco suggests, suing people like Stephen Miller, suing people like Tom Homan and the former DHS director for their absolute dismissal of the Bill of Rights for many of these people. It seems to me, I love the prospect, but it seems to me that the courts would just be stacked against it.
Well, I think I might have to disagree with you on that one. It's my understanding, and I could be wrong, that the ex post facto provision of the Constitution applies only to criminal cases, not to civil cases.
That's right. That's right.
And
I didn't think that's a great point.
Yeah, this would be a civil litigation.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there'd be any constitutional bar to it. And I think it'd be fantastic. I mean, these government officials, they do whatever they want when they have this aura of immunity around them. And if they knew that they could get sued, okay, they may not get criminally prosecuted, especially under the ex post facto law. But if they knew they could get sued for big money for violating people's rights, especially intentionally violating people's rights, I think it'd be absolutely awesome.
Oh, that would be great. It actually fits a theme. I've never mentioned this to you, Jacob, but I mentioned to a couple people at FEE one time when I was down chatting with some folks. I mentioned to Sheldon Richmond one time. I said, you know what I would love? I would love it that all the politicians, when they swear an oath, they could be held liable for any damages that their statutes and proposals bring to anybody. And anybody who votes for those people would be joint and severally liable for a tortious claim. I was like, you would see nobody proposed any bills at all. It would be great.
There'd be a lot of lawsuits going on, at least today.
Yeah, then I'll get my law degree then. That's for sure. I took the LSATs a couple times.
Yeah, and I share your sentiments about Radley Balco. He is heroic, absolutely heroic. I mean, I would highly advise everybody to subscribe to his Substack column.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Jacob, you're here for part 2 of the presentation, and I obviously we lost a little bit of time there, but I wanted to ask you a couple of those questions as well, and it dovetails into the national security deep state establishment. And I called this up to show the audience, Jacob, just because I thought it'd be worthwhile. Here is just a quick search, if one goes into presearch.com, of all these headlines the day Kennedy was shot. And, I wasn't alive then. You were a little guy and you saw these things. And you got to tell us last week a little bit of what got you interested in this. And you also sent over some really good pieces of information to me where you break this down into basically a number of areas that you can hold in a handful of areas that are the key points. And you've written about these things, and I'll show the Amazon site where people can check out a lot of the work that you've done. Encounter with Evil, Regime Change, some amazing work by you that is out there. And I'd love for you to sort of pick up and offer to the audience, after your initial interest, you mentioned to us that there are a number of things, especially the Zapruder film and the Autopsy, that are important to remember. And if we can sort of jump in wherever you think it's appropriate to tell people, hey, this might be a really good place for you to start. Let me give you some of the details I discovered in the early days of what should unsettle people about the way that the reporting and the government acted, the reporters and the government acted when it came to the assassination of JFK, and how that lends itself into some knowledge of what was going on before that.
Okay, well, as I indicated in my email to you, it's a very complicated case. This was a very sophisticated operation, which you would expect because the CIA had brilliant people work for them, the Ivy League graduates. I mean, these people are like geniuses. Unfortunately, their brilliance was toward evil, but in their mind, they didn't see it that way. They legitimately thought that they were protecting national security with the whole Cold War, which I say is a great big racket. But they were convinced the Reds were coming to get us, the commies were going to take over America. And so I told you, I said, there's 3 big areas especially for people that it seemed overwhelmed by the Kennedy assassination. And they say, I'm not going to go down that road, conspiracy theory and so forth. So I've broken it down into three big areas, and that is motive. That's the first area, the war that was taking place between Kennedy and the national security establishment. From even before he took office, that war was starting, and it just continued on until finally it was a full-blown war that was beneath the radar screen as far as the American public was concerned. But it was a fierce war to the finish, which the national security state won. So that's one area. The other area is the Kennedy autopsy. And this is how we know that the national security establishment assassinated Kennedy. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is an absolute fact based on the autopsy. And that's my book, The Kennedy Autopsy, which is still FFF's greatest all-time bestseller in our history. So we could go into that area first or second. And then the third area is the Zapruder film, which is a fascinating aspect of this. Maybe we ought to save that for last and either go into the Kennedy autopsy, which is how we know that this was a state-sponsored assassination, or we go into the motive, the war that was taking place. Do you have a preference?
I would love to start with that Kennedy autopsy, because the minute, and you indicated it to me in an email, you called it the linchpin, if I recall.
That's right.
The linchpin of the whole thing, because the minute one sees that they were fraudulent on the autopsy, one knows that there's some nefarious agenda at play.
Exactly. There is no way out. Once somebody determines and concludes, why, by golly, Jacob, you're right. There's fraud in this autopsy. There is no place to go. And so you don't have to study the assassination itself to determine this. You don't have to study the bullet trajectories and how many shooters and whether there was a shooter at the grassy knoll. You don't have to study any of that. In fact, as I was getting into this and I was reading more and more and more, as a lawyer, I determined that there is no way to prove that the national security establishment committed this assassination by just looking at that day, November 22nd in Dallas. There's no way to walk into a court of law and prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't even know who the shooters were.
Right.
And okay, there's anomalies, there's strange things like the magic bullet, which caused me to realize, okay, no, the official narrative can't be true. All these anomalies and all the people that rushed up the grassy knoll, but it's still not enough. It wasn't enough for me. My burden in a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. And they didn't convince me. All the writers that wrote masterful pieces analyzing the assassination did not convince me beyond a reasonable doubt. Then I came across a massive 5-volume book, a coffee table sized book, 5 volumes, like this thick, each volume, called Inside the Assassination Records Review Board by Douglas Horn, who served on the Assassination Records Review Board in the 1990s. Now, the ARRB had been formed to enforce the JFK Records Act, which mandated that federal agencies had to reveal their assassination-related records, which they had kept secret, much of which they had kept secret for over 30 years. And that act was in response to Oliver Stone's movie JFK. So it starts with Oliver Stone, goes to the JFK Records Act, goes to the ARRB. Douglas Horn gets hired, and he works there at the ARRB, which enforces the release of this information. Most of his 5-volume book, which he wrote about 10 years after serving on the commission, was revolved around the autopsy. And so I start reading volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, and I am bowled over. Anybody that takes the time to read this 5-volume work, and it is not an easy read. In fact, my book, The Kennedy Autopsy, is an easy-to-read synopsis of Horn's 5-volume book. There's very difficult sections in there to understand about X-rays and photography, but I just kept reading, even though I couldn't understand what he was talking about with like X-ray technology and stuff. I just kept reading. At the end of that book, I was convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that this was a fraudulent autopsy. And once I concluded that as a lawyer, that's what's called circumstantial evidence, which is just as valid as direct evidence. Right. So people who are looking for a confession or a videotape of some CIA agent saying, yeah, we did it, you'll never get that. But circumstantial evidence is if the autopsy is fraudulent, which was done by the military. That's one undisputed fact in this whole thing. The military conducted the autopsy. Then there is no way out. You have to conclude that they assassinated Kennedy because there's no innocent explanation for it. The autopsy took place like a few hours after the assassination. So, in other words, somebody's not going to sit there and say, hey, why don't we have a fraudulent autopsy now that Kennedy's been killed?
Right. Right.
It's ridiculous. It has to be built in as part of the cover-up of the assassination itself.
Right. It has to be part of the system they pre-planned to make sure that they could handle any of the evidence and control all of the variables they could possibly control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what's an autopsy? Well, an autopsy is a medical examination of the body of the deceased to determine what the causes of the death are. And so this was a straight murder case in Texas. That at that time, it was not against the law, the federal law, to assassinate a president. So it was just a straight murder case in Dallas County, Texas, just like any other murder case. The jurisdiction lay with the district attorney there and with the Dallas police. So Kennedy is shot at 12:30 p.m., right afternoon. At 1 p.m., he's declared dead. Under Texas law, in a murder case, they have to have an autopsy. There is no choice. The law mandates it in every murder case or every homicide. And so the Dallas County medical examiner was there at Parkland Hospital where Kennedy died, had been treated, and said, I'm going to perform this autopsy now. And immediately a team of Secret Service agents said, oh, no, you're not. We're taking this body with us.
So immediately that, and this is really more of a distraction, but immediately there's problems of federalism that are just being destroyed here because regardless of whether he's the president of the United States or not, he's in Texas and he got murdered. So the Texas statutes, there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that would allow the federal government to take control of that.
That's right. The federal government had no jurisdiction at all. In fact, the Secret Service really had no legitimate role in there because their job is to protect the president, not a body.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned in the book that, and I think they even mentioned it on the Amazon page. They actually in Bethesda, they did 2 autopsies. They brought the body in twice. How did that go?
Well, I need to get to that, but let me just finish here with Dallas. The medical examiner stood his ground and said, oh, no, I'm performing this autopsy. The law requires it. And they said, oh, no, you're not. And they brandished guns.
Whoa.
And they said they were operating under orders. Okay, so who gave these orders? And so the nurses and the doctors said they were scared to death. They were screaming, yelling, cussing, pushing. One Secret Service agent grabbed the medical examiner, picked him up, took him over against a wall and wagged his finger and said, no. And so with this threat of violence, they wheeled the body out, which had been put in a great big expensive casket, like a funeral type casket, weighed about, 3,000 pounds or something. They take it to Dallas Love Field where Lyndon Johnson, who's now the president, is waiting for it. In fact, he had seats removed while all this was going on in the back of Air Force One to make room for the casket.
So immediately we know that there's a very strong likelihood that one would be correct in suspecting Lyndon Johnson had foreknowledge of and was involved in this, as you have discussed in some of your writing.
Exactly, because he had to have been the one to order that Secret Service team to get the body out of there. They said they were operating under orders. Well, he's over there at Love Field in Dallas having seats removed, knowing that how else would he know the body was coming?
Right.
If he hadn't issued the order. And here's the other thing is that he was at Parkland, and then on the way to Love Field, Johnson was saying this could be a Soviet attack, a nuclear attack, a first stage of a nuclear attack against us. And he, on the way to Love Field, he was scrunching down in the seat. So he gets to Love Field, and he lollygags waiting for the casket to appear. So it was all fake.
Right.
He knew there wasn't any chance of a Soviet attack, even though he was racing. He was lying, but it's very revealing, because why would he do that? All right. So he takes the body to Andrews Air Force Base, and there's plenty of medical examiners in the Washington, D.C. area, and lots of hospitals. Very competent. We've probably got the best doctors and medical examiners in the country around Washington.
Right.
But he doesn't pick any of them. Instead, he turns the body over to the military to have it transported over to Bethesda National Medical Center, which is a Navy facility, military facility. So what role does the military have in this? I mean, you asked, what role does the federal government have? Okay, that's a great question. No role at all. But what role does the military have in this?
Yeah.
We weren't at war. I mean, Kennedy wasn't killed on the field of battle, and yet he's turned it over to the military. Why?
Right.
Well, because they have a culture of secrecy in the military. They can classify things.
Right.
So a lot of this got discovered later, 30 years later, when the ARRB started taking depositions of people and so forth. But there, as you may know, there was a second investigation of the Kennedy assassination in the 1970s under the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
Right.
And when they started investigating the assassination again, they learned that most, if not all, of the personnel that had participated in the autopsy had been sworn to secrecy immediately after the autopsy. Like enlisted men and security people and technicians, they were taken into an office and read the Riot Act. You will never talk about what you saw here. And not only that, we will come after you with court-martial or criminal prosecution if we ever get wind. This is totally classified, top secret. And then they made them sign secrecy oaths, written secrecy oaths, saying, I will never reveal what I saw. Well, after the House Select Committee on Assassinations learned about this, they started releasing these people from their secrecy oaths.
Nice.
And some of the enlisted men started saying, well, we took the president's body into the morgue in a cheap shipping casket. It wasn't a big, heavy.
3,000. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Dallas casket leaves Air Force One and starts slowly making its way to the Bethesda National Naval Medical Center. And it arrives there at 6:55. Okay, it's 5 minutes to 7. These enlisted men, including a Marine sergeant named Roger Boyden, said, no, we met the casket at the morgue, which was in the back of the facility. The Navy vehicle arrives at the front at 6:55. The morgue is in the back. Yeah. These enlisted men said, no, we met the body. It was brought over in a black hearse with men in suits. We don't know who they were, but they were in suits. And it was in a cheap shipping casket like they use in bodies when they're transporting them by plane or train. Mm-hmm. And that was at 6:30 p.m., 6:35 p.m. Well, that's almost half an hour before the official entry time, official arrival time there at the front of the deal. So, okay, so it's there at 6:35. They carry the casket into the morgue with Kennedy's body in it, which can only mean one thing. That Dallas casket out there in the front is empty. Okay. There's no way around that. Now, were these enlisted men lying? Well, what would their motive be for lying? And these, like a Marine sergeant and other people in the security detail and people that there was another guy, Robinson, forget what his first name is. He worked for the embalming company, Galler's Funeral Home. He arrived early, and they didn't notice that he was in there watching what was happening before the autopsy. Now, this is pre-autopsy stuff, because the official autopsy doesn't start till 8 p.m. 1 hour after they arrived at the front. All right, so the body's brought in this cheap shipping casket at 6:35. Already, there's some shenanigans going on here.
Absolutely. It's like a magic trick. They've got a deflection for everybody to watch while they're actually doing their real work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they take the body in and they do things there to the body. They alter the body, the medical examiners for the Navy. And then they bring the body back out, and they put it in the Dallas casket at that point. What happened was that the Navy vehicle in front with the empty Dallas casket took off out of the clear blue, just took off and lost everybody, including the security detail whose job it was to carry the casket in. It comes around to the back of the morgue. They put the body into the casket, and then they go back around and meet the security detail at around 8 p.m. And then they go back to the morgue, and now the official arrival time at 8 p.m. of the body. That's where the press was. And so everybody believed for 30 years, or at least in the 70s when these guys started talking, that the body had gone from Andrews Air Force Base to the front of the morgue, back to the back of the morgue, carried in at 8 p.m. These guys established, no. What actually happened was the body was brought in early. They did shenanigans with the body for about 45 minutes. They brought the body back out, reunited it with the Dallas casket, went around the front, hooked up with the security detail whose job it was to carry it in, who they had lost, came around back at 8 o'clock. Now, I'm reading all this in Horn's book, and I'm saying, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I mean, and Horn has done one of the most masterful documentaries anybody will ever see, and I highly recommend people to watch it. It just came out about 4 or 5 months ago. All you have to do is Google 3 casket entries into and Douglas Horn, and you'll see one of the best documentaries you'll ever see. Well, at that point, I know that there's shenanigans going on here. Okay, there's no innocent explanation for 3 separate casket entries into the Bethesda morgue.
Right.
It's just not possible. And they also had other witnesses. The ARRB established other witnesses. For example, they had the enlisted men carrying in the cheap shipping casket with the body in it. So obviously what had happened was they had removed the body from the Dallas casket, and they had helicoptered it. And sure enough, there was a helicopter on the other side of Air Force One, the non-public side, after it landed. It was dark at this point. It was November.
Right.
And what they did was they took that shipping casket in the helicopter to Bethesda, which was 5 minutes away, put it into that hearse, drove it over there, carried in at 6:35. But they still got to get the Dallas casket in. They got to reunite the body with the Dallas casket. So they established through 2 FBI agents that they carried in the Dallas casket empty at 7:17. So here you've got the shipping casket goes in 6:35. Right. They do the shenanigans. They have to put the body back into the Dallas casket. So these 2 FBI agents who are clearly as very honest people, they think that they're carrying in the Dallas casket to start the autopsy. And so they wheel this in on what's called a church dolly or church truck with 2 Secret Service agents, the driver and the passenger of the limousine in which the assassination had taken place. And that's significant, but because these 2 guys, the Secret Service agents, they knew there were shenanigans going on, but the 2 FBI agents didn't. So when they testified, they said, oh yeah, we wheeled in this casket, the Dallas casket. Well, that's how they got the body back into the Dallas casket. Then they get it back into the Navy vehicle, drive around to the front, and say, "Oh, we're sorry we lost you guys," and they get the detail that carries them in, and that's even a fascinating story too.
I'll just show. By the way, Jacob, I'll just show. This is a Substack by someone named Joseph Bakis, and he has it linked in, and people can find this on YouTube. The 3 Bethesda casket entries revisited, and you go.
You will have no doubts after you see this. Now, what I've tried to explain in as simple terms as I can may be complicated, may sound complicated. You watch this video and it will not be complicated. Horn has done a masterful job.
Well, we'll play some of that tomorrow night, I think, as a follow-up to remind people, because I don't like to get news cycle amnesia on the show, as I call it sometimes. So this would be a great thing to add tomorrow night, Jacob. Thank you. This is great.
Sure. Okay, so that's one item of fraud where there's no innocent explanation for 3 casket entries into the Bethesda morgue, especially when they're keeping it all secret. Okay, let's go to another example. The 2 brain exams. Now, Kennedy was a brilliant guy, but I think everybody would agree that he only had 1 brain. He did not have 2 brains. So they have, and also everybody agrees that on the headshot, he got hit in the head with 1 bullet. That was the bullet that killed him. And everybody agrees that it blew out like half his brain.
You can, and I don't want to speak too soon, but you can see it, at least in the Zapruder film. You can see it just.
Okay, but don't put too much stock in the Zapruder film.
That's part of where I hesitate. Yes,
because that frame that you're talking about, we're going to be talking about fraud. That frame 313, we're going to be talking about fraud there. So we're just getting started, but I'm just giving you some examples. I mean, I would recommend buying my book, because there I detail all the instances of fraud, or not all of them, but I summarize what Horn has done in his book. Like, I don't go into great detail over the fraudulent X-rays. It's a very complicated subject. Horn explains it perfectly. There's another guy named David Mantik, who's a radiation oncologist that has done tremendous research and has established beyond any reasonable doubt that the X-rays are fraudulent, along with the photographs, the official photographs. But let's not go there yet. Let's stick with the 2 brain exams, because this is really fascinating. There were 3 pathologists: Humes, Boswell, and Fink. Humes and Boswell were Navy, and Fink was Army. But they were all saying under oath, and had said for 30 years, that there was only 1 brain exam, which is standard. I mean, at a brain exam, they put formaldehyde in the brain at the autopsy, and they let it fix, harden up. So the brain exam is usually like a few days after the autopsy, after it's firmed up. Because then they slice it like a loaf of bread so that they can study the trajectories of the bullets. So Horn details in his book that one day the general counsel, the lawyer for the ARRB who conducted all the depositions, a guy named Jeremy Gunn, calls him into his office and says, "I want you to do a timeline on the brain examination." They didn't suspect anything was amiss. Gunn just says, "Do a timeline." So Horn says, "Oh, he loves doing that, man. I mean, he's like expert at timelines." So he goes back and does the chronology of the brain exam, and he comes back to Horn really in a disconcerted state of mind, very anxious because of what he's about to tell Horn. He doesn't know what Horn's reaction is going to be, because the ARRB was prohibited from reinvestigating the assassination. Somebody had slipped a provision in the law that said you can't investigate any aspect of the assassination. You can only get things revealed, documents released.
Wow.
Yeah. So if they found
so unscrupulous, it's incredible.
Oh, it's amazing, because that means if they found something, they couldn't do anything about it. And it was strictly enforced. They were told everybody knew that if they got caught investigating something, they were most likely going to get fired. but Gunn clearly suspected stuff, and so did Horn. Horn clearly suspected stuff. He expresses in the book he was surprised they even hired him, because they wanted people that were just totally neutral. But they were very careful, and Horn was very careful that they were just trying to clarify the record. That's the way it always got phrased: clarify the record. So Gunn says to Horn, "Do this timeline." Horn comes back in and says, "I got to tell you what I figured out." He says, "I don't think there was one brain exam. I think there was 2 brain exams." And Gunn said, and he was really nervous about how Gunn was going to respond. And Gunn said, "Well, that was my conclusion too. I wanted to see if you arrived at it independently."
Wow.
And so how they figured this out was that at the first brain exam, which clearly was the brain of President Kennedy, where he'd been shot, there was 3 people participating: Humes, Boswell, 2 of the pathologists, but not Fink. But also present was the official photographer for the autopsy, a man named John Stringer, who was a very competent guy. He was an instructor at the Bethesda Medical School. They had a medical school there in this facility, total professional. And he had photographed the brain during the brain examination, and he told the ARRB, they sliced it up like a loaf of bread, like they're supposed to. And I took pictures, and he told them what angles he had taken the pictures of, and what the condition of the brain was when he did this, what kind of camera he used, what kind of film he used. So they showed him pictures of the brain, and he says, "No, those are not my pictures."
Wow.
Yeah, he says, "I did not take those pictures. I don't use that kind of film." And he says, "That's totally unlike what my procedure on taking pictures." He says, "Those are not." And he says, the brain they were showing him was the official brain in the record, and the picture of the official brain in the record that was not cut up. It was an intact brain.
Right.
Which clearly had been brought. Remember, it's a medical school. They have brain specimens and heart specimens for the medical students and stuff.
You're right. Right.
It was a damaged brain, but not cut up and sliced up. So then they determined from Fink, they'd already taken the depositions of Humes and Boswell, much to their consternation, because they couldn't call them back and say, "Let's get to the bottom of this." Because Humes and Boswell were insistent. Oh, yeah. And Stringer said this was 2 or 3 days after the autopsy. So they get Fink in, and they said, "Did you attend the brain examination?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." "When was it?" He says, "It was about a week after the autopsy." And, well, who was there? Well, Boswell and Humes and a photographer. He didn't know who the photographer was, but it wasn't John Stringer. And so that's how they knew that there was 2 separate brain exams. And the second, I mean, if that's not fraud, I don't know what is.
And the amazing thing is, for the some people might, in a consequentialist way, they might say, what bearing does that have on me today? What does this, all these things. Yeah, we kind of figure, even if they aren't skeptical, they say, what can we do about it? But this is, I think, each one of these separate incidents that you get to report, your incident reports based on your research, allow people to see that if someone were to poo-poo one side, to say, well, I don't believe that. Well, here's even more to show you that even if you're looking at it as a consequentialist, to say, well, what bearing does this have on me? These are forces that influenced at the highest level in the United States government the elimination of a guy who stood against these forces. And these forces are still around today. So acquiring as much data and as much evidence that shows us that somebody was doing something very bad, and if we can tie it into where Kennedy stood politically, philosophically, and ideologically, then we can start to see some of these figures and why they wanted to get rid of him, and why it's important for those people who think, I want to see how this is important to my life, beyond the moral side of this and how dark it is. maybe that can convince some people, yeah, guess what? They have a lot of power, and they did this to the president of the United States, and they did it for reasons, very, very dark reasons.
Well, yeah, and that's that other area I mentioned that we can get into in another session as to why this happened and why it matters. Remember, I mentioned that book, The Homework for Everybody, JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas.
Yes.
But the subtitle is Why He Died and Why It Matters. Why it matters today. This is not just some esoteric historical thing that we're talking about. We're talking about something that affects our lives because we're talking about a national security state that still exists, that has got us embroiled in forever wars, coups, sanctions, embargoes, death, destruction, forever wars, assassinations.
Absolutely.
It is the biggest threat to our freedom, much bigger than the welfare state is. But we'll talk about that later as to why it matters. It still matters. If this were just a matter of studying the Lincoln assassination and trying to figure out the details of it, okay, I can see somebody would say, what's that have to do with me?
Right.
This has everything to do with your life today.
Exactly. And if anybody cares about rights, if anybody cares about the founder system and the sacrifices of so many people who ideologically, philosophically, religiously believe in natural rights and fair treatment of their neighbors, this is like a giant pall hanging over the last 60 years of the United States.
Oh, absolutely. And it is a pall. It's a darkness enveloping this country because all too many people do not want to confront the truth. And they'll say, oh, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. No, they don't want to know. You see, I know now. And if you study this autopsy, you will know too. Don't take my word. Watch Horn's video. Go study the 2 brain exam situation in Horn's book. In fact, the Washington Post and the Associated Press both wrote articles about this, the 2 brain exams. At the time, the ARRB came up with it, but there was no investigative reporting done after that. I mean, this is something where you would think the Post would send out an investigative reporter and say, let's get to the bottom of this. One way or the other, we got to get to the bottom of this.
Right.
There's no evidence of that as far as I know.
Well, it's important. It's so important that people like you and others have collected this information.
Oh, it's critical. It's critical. And Horn's the heroic guy in this. I'm just a secondhand dealer in what he compiled in this book. I mean, this is really a watershed book. Horn really broke the case wide open. There's a lot of assassination researchers. Most of them have done fantastic work. Horn's book is the watershed book as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much further you want to go. I could give you a third example if you want.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Yes.
Okay. The Dallas doctors, Parkland Hospital was one of the best trauma hospitals in the country. I mean, if you're going to get shot or stabbed by a knife, going to Parkland, you couldn't do anything worse than that. I mean, anything better than that, because these doctors, this is what they specialized in. And it was a teaching hospital, so they're very competent. So Kennedy's wheeled in, and they immediately put a tube in his throat. He had a bullet hole right here. And they put a tube in there to give a tracheotomy, help him breathe. But Dr. McClelland goes to the head of the gurney where he is, and he looks behind his head and says, you guys need to come and look at this. Because they're all trying to figure out how to save this man's life. He's still alive.
Yeah.
And, well, he's got a baseball-sized hole in the back of his head. And so they knew he was dead. I mean, nobody can survive that kind of wound. So they went through the motions, making him feel comfortable and stuff. But every one of them, when they saw this baseball-sized hole, knew he was a dead man. And sure enough, within 30 minutes, he's dead. But when they have a press conference about 2 hours afterward, the 2 doctors at the press conference said, well, he's got an entry wound here because when a bullet enters a body, it enters the size of the bullet. Just logical. So and he had a here where they put the tracheotomy in.
Right.
And he's got this exit size wound up here because when a bullet enters the head, it enters the size of the bullet, but it's pushing mass in front of it. So it comes out with an explosion.
Right.
So there was an exit wound. Well, okay, both of these points mean shooters from the front. But Oswald is in the rear.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. So the body's then taken to Bethesda. They do their shenanigans, which we can go to at a later time if you want to, is what they did in that 40-minute period of time and why they did it, how they did it. But if you look at the official autopsy photographs in the official record today, I mean, you can't see the originals because you need special permission, but the copies, guess what? The photographs show the back of the head to be totally intact. There's no hole there. Okay.
It's impossible.
Let me also mention, it wasn't just the doctors that said the hole is there. Audrey Bell, one of the treating nurses, she says, yeah, there was a hole there. Massive hole. And Clint Hill, he was the Secret Service agent that jumped on the back of the limousine and pushed Jacqueline Kennedy back into the back seat.
Right.
He was covering Kennedy all the way to the hospital, which was about a 7 or 8 minute trip to Parkland Hospital. He said, I was seeing this hole the whole way because his head was right there in front of me. So the official autopsy photographs show no hole. So
it's so blatantly corrupt.
So the official response to this is that these doctors clearly weren't lying or making this up. I mean, that they must have imagined this wound. All of them, the nurses, the doctors, Clint Hill, everybody just imagined a wound that didn't exist. Well, a fascinating aspect of this is that the ARRB discovers the existence of a woman named Sandra Spencer, who worked for the Navy. She was a Navy petty officer in Washington. She worked closely with President Kennedy on developing photographs at their lab there where she worked. And Jeremy Gunn, the general counsel, said of all the witnesses that they interviewed or deposed at ARB, Sandra Spencer, in his opinion, was the most credible. Very professional woman.
Mm.
They take her deposition, and she says, on the weekend of the assassination, I was brought autopsy photographs to develop on a top secret classified basis. And they told me, don't even look at them too long if you can avoid it. She's there developing the photographs. But she kept her secret for 30 years. I mean, that's it's classified, it's military. And so in her deposition, they said, well, here is the photograph showing the back of Kennedy's head. She says, oh no, those are not the photographs I took. That's a completely different set. The photographs I took showed a 2 to 2.5 inch hole in the back of Kennedy's head. It was not intact. And this was after the embalming. So the embalmers had clearly closed up as much of the hole as they could because the Dallas doctor said it was about the size of an orange.
Right.
And so now she says now it's about 2 and 2.5 inches. Well, no doubt because they had closed up as much as they could.
Mm-hmm.
But she said, those are not my photographs. In fact, we still don't know where her photographs are.
Amazing.
So now you have.
I'm glad at least she testified to that. That's great that she said that at least.
Oh, it was incredible. It was incredible. And then here's another little tidbit. The 2 FBI agents that I told you were very honest individuals. Right. They were clearly not part of this cover up at all. They were there just to do their job, to monitor the autopsies.
Sure.
They were never called before the Warren Commission. These are FBI agents that were there at the autopsy, were never called to testify before the Warren Commission. And so
I wonder why.
Exactly, because Gunn shows them the autopsy photographs showing the back of the head to be intact, and both of them separately. They were deposed separately, so they weren't reinforcing each other's testimony. But they each said, no, there was a hole there. And
Unbelievable.
one of them even said, that photograph looks doctored. And and these were guys that did not believe there was a conspiracy. So it's like they didn't have an axe to grind at all. They were just giving. So you either have all these people telling the truth, and remember, these are the best doctors in the country on trauma.
Yeah.
Or you have fraudulent photographs that falsely depict. So those are just 3 examples of what I'm talking about. Now, there's also a great documentary that people should watch called What the Doctor Saw that came out about 2 years ago that interview the Dallas doctors, and they say, that was their job. Their job was to save the president. So they're going to imagine a wound.
Boy, I wonder what it must have been like to be a family member of any of these people during that, multi-decade period. Now, many of them have passed away. Maybe their kids are around and so on. To be aware of that and be frustrated because you just can't get the information out to people. Or a person like that woman you mentioned who held on to the information and finally releases that information, knowing that many of the people involved with it, they got away with it. But for the greater purpose of revealing the truth and showing these forces and how important that is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because some of these people didn't realize that the significance of what they had seen.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. That's a great point.
They didn't keep up with all the assassination literature and stuff. And
right.
Sandra Spencer, I'm not really sure, but I got the impression that she hadn't concluded anything was nefarious about anything. She was just there giving testimony.
Wow.
But there were other people, technicians, who had read the assassination literature, and they realized that they had been part of something pretty dark here, very dark here.
Amazing.
And so when they gave testimony, you could tell that they were disconcerted that they had participated in this. So those are 3 examples of fraud, and I haven't even. That's just the tip of the iceberg. That's why I recommend people to get my book. But what I'm saying, Gardner, is that if you conclude that what I have said is right after doing your own research, you have nowhere to go. That's why I keep saying the autopsy is the linchpin. If you conclude that these 3 things happened, you have nowhere else to go except to convict the national security establishment of this assassination, because there's no innocent explanation for it. None. This took place a few hours after the assassination. What could they possibly say that would be innocent that would explain this?
And Jacob, these forces that were around then, and many of the neocon forces that started to rise up after that, they were involved that post-World War II era during the Cold War. They were involved in leveraging that Cold War mentality. We hear Churchill's big speech and so on, all of that, Iron Curtain mentality into things we're dealing with today that I discuss some of my own personal experience with Ukraine and the overthrow of Yanukovych and the way that they were working with people like Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, and they were working with neo-Nazis over there, even during Jeane Kirkpatrick's period in the Reagan administration, bringing it closer to that period when the George H.W. Bush elements were involved in working with these post-Soviet or almost post-Soviet, post-World War II, anti-Soviet forces that were directly connected to a lot of Nazi groups from World War II that had gone into Ukraine that didn't like the Soviets. You can see these power blocks and this mentality where they have a big narrative for a lot of Americans, a lot of patriotic people, to say the Reds better dead than red. And obviously, if they can construct some narrative that the Reds might have been behind this, that a guy had gone over to Russia and he was attached to the assassination, that perpetuates it even longer. In the meantime, these people are setting up biochemical labs during the Obama's Senate period with Dick Lugar in Ukraine, and then they overthrow another government, the government in Ukraine, and we see people getting killed. We see now something we're dealing with now, which is the United States and NATO and the EU are generating death and destruction in a place like Ukraine because of the very mindset that was behind the killing of JFK.
Absolutely. Look, the Cold War is one of the greatest rackets in history. The notion that the Reds were coming to get us, everybody bought into it. But it's one of the greatest rackets in history. And so when they lost that racket, they thought they had this racket forever. Ever-growing budgets for the Pentagon, the CIA, power, defense contractors. When it suddenly ended, much to their surprise, they were not about to let go of it. Now they generated the war on terrorism by going into Iraq and killing people with sanctions and stuff, getting people all riled up to retaliate, like the 9/11 attacks. But they never gave up on this racket, and that's why they kept using NATO to move eastward, to provoke Russia into invading Ukraine, and they still haven't given. I mean, once they, remember once Russia attacks, they said, we're shocked that they're doing this. They weren't shocked. That's what they knew Russia was going to do.
Exactly.
And now look at what they're doing today. I mean, I just wrote about it today in my blog that they've published a report that Cuba is now the inspiration that's directing the democratic socialists like Mamdani and Bernie Sanders and them. So it's like, wow, the Cold War is back. The Reds are coming to get us again.
They're gonna take over the vote. They're gonna do this. They're gonna do that.
Yes.
And I got to compliment a number of people because I've been talking about just specifically on the SAVE Act. Again, that's a great lesson for people to understand that if they read their Constitution, they can see what Donald Trump is trying to do there to consolidate power over the vote, to use some boogeyman of the Cuban influence or the Islamic influence in Michigan or whatever it might be, to try to take control over it when the Constitution clearly states that the states have the power for the choosing with a U of their electors for the president. So anything that has to do with the presidential election that prevents the states from coming up with their own rules about it is blatantly unconstitutional. Congressional and Senate elections are different. But when it comes to the election for the president, the states are supposed to come up with that method. And so just that itself is so obvious that anybody in Washington who's working at the White House, like a Stephen Miller, who wants to talk about this sort of stuff, or anyone else who is pushing that narrative, that they've got to know that they're selling somebody snake oil. It's bogus. This whole thing is bogus because they want to consolidate power. That's what it's about. Because otherwise, if people like Stephen Miller, who never passed the bar, but are familiar supposedly with the Constitution, they know that it's not part of the federal purview to control the choosing of the electors, but they still want to control it.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what they're up to. Like they have some kind of nefarious plan in mind. They're also accusing the Chinese now of influencing the election, the coming election.
Oh, that's right.
There's your communist connection, you see.
It's astounding.
And so now they have the best of all worlds. They got the war on terrorism and the war on communism going, the old Cold War racket.
Right.
And it's like what you say, it's all about power. It's all about control. And that's what the whole Cold War was about. But it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. The whole root of this thing is the national security state. This is the deep state. This is the deep state that Kennedy took on. And Kennedy lost. But we'll talk about that later as the war that was taking place. And Kennedy lost. But that's what we're facing here. A dysfunctional, evil governmental system.
Yeah. I'll mention, I remember when my mom was watching the Republican convention when Reagan got the nomination, and they went into a back room and they came out with George H.W. Bush. And my mom said, oh no, what are they doing? Because my mom was aware of some of the things that George H.W. Bush was tied to with the CIA and things like that. And she said, that is a huge mistake. And you could see the gears were working behind the Reagan administration. And it's astounding to see how it keeps going and it perpetuates itself. And I'll leave it at that, Jacob. But I do want to mention One of the things I want to head over to suggest people go to the Amazon site, check it out, and then head over to FFF because you have all the books listed, your publications and so on. But here's a great example of what you discussed when they went in with those Secret Service agents. And this is just on the sample that people can see over at the Kindle site on Amazon. It says, here's how Crenshaw described this amazing encounter in his book, Conspiracy of Silence. As though on cue, a phalanx of guards poured into Trauma Room 1 just as the coffin was being rolled out. They looked like a swarm of locusts descending upon a cornfield. Without any discussion, they encircled the casket and began escorting the president's body down the hall toward the emergency room exit. A man in a suit leading the group, holding a submachine gun, left little doubt in my mind who was in charge. That he wasn't smiling best describes the look on his face. Just outside Trauma Room 1, Jacqueline Kennedy joined the escort and placed her hand on the coffin as she walked along beside it. I followed directly behind them. When the entourage had moved into the main hall, Dr. Earl Rose, chief of forensic pathology, confronted the men in suits. Roy Kellerman, the man leading the group, looked sternly at Dr. Rose and announced, "My friend, this is the body of the President of the United States, and we're going to take it back to Washington." Dr. Rose bristled and replied, "No, that's not the way things are. When there's a homicide, we must have an autopsy." "He's the president. He's going with us," Kellerman barked. This is great reading. I hope people will pick this up. And Jacob, sometime...
Let me pique your interest. Let me interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
Remember I told you there was that second casket entry into... There was the first casket entry with a cheap metal casket, shipping casket, with the president's body in it. Then they had to get the heavy Dallas casket, which was empty, into the morgue to put the body back in. And remember I told you there was 2 FBI agents who testified to that and 2 Secret Service agents?
Yeah.
Guess who one of the Secret Service agents was? Roy Kellerman.
Of course. Right.
And so Kellerman is the leader of this band, the gang there, that was brandishing guns. He had a submachine gun, getting that body out of Parkland. And then guess who was in the passenger seat of the limousine that was where the president was shot? That would be Roy Kellerman.
Roy Kellerman. Wow.
And when we get to the Zapruder film, we'll see something interesting. Like, I forget how many, but I think it was like 30 or 40, something like that. Witnesses said that limousine made a complete stop and then waited for the shot that hit him in the head.
I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
Well, the Zapruder film shows no stop.
That's right. That's right. It doesn't.
That's so right. We'll get to that. But if it really did make a stop, and I have no doubts it did, and when we get to the Zapruder film, I think people will see that it made a stop. Kellerman was right there. So
wow. Wow. This, and I hate to say it because it's obviously this is real. A man lost his life. A woman lost her husband. Children lost their father. Family members lost a loved one. A lot of people lost a friend, and everything got ramped up in the security state, or was ramping up. But in a way, the mystery behind this points to certain people, and I'm glad that the fingers sort of can still be pointed at some of these people, and regardless of the fact that there's never really going to be a trial. At least they can be held in contempt in the courtroom of popular opinion, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah, but keep in mind, this is the real distorted part of the national security state, is that many of these people who participated in this honestly believed they were protecting national security. And do we have a few more minutes?
Sure.
I'll give you a real life example of this mentality. 10 years after the Kennedy assassination, we go to Chile, where a socialist has been elected president, Salvador Allende.
Yeah.
And immediately, and he's friends with Fidel Castro. People might even say he's a communist, but he's a clear dyed-in-the-wool socialist, self-proclaimed socialist, proud of it. And U.S. officials decide he's a threat to U.S. national security, even though he's way down there in Chile. But more important, they tell the national security establishment of Chile, because they were a national security state too, you have a duty to remove your president from office. And the head of the overall head of the armed forces, a guy named General Rene Schneider, says, no, that's not the way things work. We have a constitution here. We have to wait till the next election. And U.S. officials said, no. You know, like the Pentagon and the CIA, their counterparts were saying, you don't have that luxury. You're going to go down before the next election. You have a moral duty, regardless of what your Constitution says, because your Constitution is not a suicide pact. Now, I don't have any quotes on this, but I'm just talking logically.
Right.
They had Schneider removed from the scene. The CIA did. They smuggled in some high-powered weapons, hired kidnappers. They tried to kidnap Schneider. This guy was a very honorable man, very integrity, family man. He was carrying a pistol. He's a general. They had a shootout on the streets of Santiago. They shot him dead.
Oh.
And once he's removed, now the national security establishment of Chile says, yes, we need to remove this threat to national security.
Oh, boy.
And they try to assassinate him with the war between them, between the executive branch and the national security branch, was out in the open. They were trying to assassinate him with missiles fired by Air Force planes. And Allende had a helmet on. He had a high-powered weapon. So my point is that this is not unusual that happened 10 years before, a war between the national security state, whose mentality is when that president becomes a threat to national security, it is our sworn duty to deal with that threat. So my point is that in their minds, they were doing the right thing. They weren't doing something evil. They were
perverse.
Protecting them. Oh, it's horribly perverse.
You know, a friend of mine was in military intelligence, and he was scheduled on September 11th, 2001 to be in a meeting in the Pentagon. And he got caught on the Beltway, and he was late. And he had an early cell phone, and his wife called him while he was stuck in traffic. She goes, "Are you listening to the radio?" He goes, "No." She goes, "Turn on the radio and get off the road. Don't go to the Pentagon." And his meeting was scheduled for that section that got hit, very clearly got hit by the rocket that they sent in there, not a plane, I don't think. Yeah. And so he's like one of my best friends. I grew up with this guy. We used to do lightsaber duels in the snow at night with these little light up lightsabers. He almost got killed because of the same mentality you're discussing. He would have been a sacrificial lamb for the national security, this abstract monstrosity that they continually use to crush people. And so, you know, to bring it home to people, if they think that that's just long distance news or anything like that, I'll give another example. A friend of mine at a college who's a math professor used to travel to Ukraine all the time. Used to love going to Ukraine and was interested in marrying a girl from Ukraine. Doesn't go to Ukraine anymore. Doesn't go there anymore because as he started to go, he started to realize there are some problems here in Ukraine that have to do with the deep state. And I'm not going anymore. And what if he were there? What if he were there during the Maidan coup? Boy, oh boy, it's very interesting too, because it's almost like, you know, trying to punch a wall, you know, but it is important to keep up the fight and get this information out there. This is wonderful. I want to show this again, Jacob, before we go. I want to show the Kennedy Autopsy, which is one of the many, many books that you put out. It's specifically about this, but also we have the Zapruder film book that is another important book. And then the National Security Establishment State. You've got so many books. I'm going to click over on Amazon and click on your name just so people can see some of these great items that are out there. Let me show the books. So here we go. Encounter with Evil, Regime Change, and so many others over here. Oh, I love the Tyranny of Gun Control. I have that with a slightly different cover, I think. But you can see so many important ones. Liberty, Security, and the War on Terror. I hope people check them out, Jacob. That'll be just fantastic. And thanks for taking this time. This is really important.
It really is important. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I think the future of this country really rests on dismantling this evil structure called the deep state, the national security state. Yeah, Kennedy lost his battle against the deep state, but that doesn't mean that we have to lose it. That's why we keep fighting, because you never know the power of ideas. People all of a sudden may experience a great awakening, but if you keep silent, then people don't realize there's a problem.
No. And if I may, I'd like to sort of translate it into the war on immigrants, because one of the things that we can, I think, let me know if you disagree, but I think the mentality that has been ginned up so much of anti-immigrant sentiment, of they're stealing our jobs, which, comes from a lack of economic understanding, the division of labor and things like that. And then the slight, the valid complaints about welfarism, but welfare is bad. Welfarism is bad for everybody, all these things. But the way that they isolate it, focus it, and then it got ginned up under Biden where they were handing people all sorts of, welfarist type housing and things like that. We can see to a certain small extent the way that they work with Geo Corporation, the Geo Group. Tom Holman used to work for Geo Group. Pam Bondi worked for a firm that got contracts with Geo Group. The current ICE head formerly worked with Geo. He was on their board of Geo Group, the private prison contracting business. They, to a small extent, are a great parallel, a great avatar, one might say, to how this sort of thing works, maybe a little bit less surreptitiously, but with the same sort of you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, and we'll all be much better off financially and so on and so forth. When the payoff comes, for example, as in New Hampshire, they wanted to have this warehouse that was an empty warehouse owned by a friend of the state GOP establishment, a friend of the governor, a GOP person who used to be on the board of BAE Systems and on the board of Fox News. She's now governor, a former senator. He's friends with her. And what's going to happen? ICE offers hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a warehouse that he can't fill because the economy is so bad. So this is a great example of the same sort of blocks of power within a sort of fascist, corporatist, national security, in this case, immigration security, police state that they've created, that not only shows the corruption of how this happens on a ground-based basis of this is money, this is how the gears will get greased in a sort of more manifest way, but in the surreptitious way, the mentality of using people's frustration on stories that have been ginned up about boogeyman to get them to comply with the growing police state. And I don't know how I'm going to, continue to investigate these sort of things or keep fighting it because it's a day-to-day thing. But I really appreciate being able to sort of, learn from you and sort of take some of your energy and continue some of this fighting in this way as well on the immigration side.
I think the point you just made is so utterly fantastic. I mean, it is so insightful. I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, I see ICE as really a de facto part of the national security state. Yeah. Okay, they're not wearing uniforms. Yeah. But their mentality is the same: brutality, ruthlessness. They're killing people without any remorse. Yeah. And I look at them like the Gestapo. The Gestapo didn't wear a uniform, but they were part of the national security state of Nazi Germany, and they are exercising control not just over these immigrants, but over us. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about. This is why our founding fathers opposed standing armies, fiercely opposed standing armies, because they knew that the greatest threat to their freedom and well-being lay with a standing army, not with some foreign enemy. And I see ICE as part of this national security state. So
right. And I'll add this, Jacob, to sort of close things off, but just to mention this. If there's room in the psyche of a person who maybe watches this show live or watches this show afterwards or hears the podcast, or someone that, someone might meet at the supermarket, if there's room on the 4th of July for those people to celebrate the sentiment and the sacrifice of people, I often mention Nathan Hale or Paul Revere or Sam Adams, these people who took these risks, the people who sacrificed so much. if there's room for people to appreciate their fight and get that sentiment and the red, white, and blue patriotism in their hearts, there's room to say, I want to appreciate the sacrifice of people who didn't get celebrated, who at that time were snuffed out because of this now large Trotskyite group of national security, deep state, neophyte fascists who now are running this new colonial British type system. And so I hope that people will say, okay, you know, I took the time to appreciate the founding fathers and the struggle of those people. Now I want to check out and see who's been fighting the good fight against the Kennedy assassins, or who's been fighting the good fight against the people who overthrew Ukraine. You know, every once in a while, it's good satisfaction to just take a second to think about those folks.
That's what we really need is reflection. Reflection and just digesting everything, how we started out as a nation, what happened after that, and how did we end up with a system that's totally opposite to what the framers wanted, what our American ancestors wanted. It's incredible.
Exactly.
But that's what we need, soul searching in this country. And that's essentially what you're calling for, you know, reflection. That's what we need.
Yeah, and it's like I said, you know, we might not be able to win any battles, but we sure do meet kindred spirits. It's great, and to be able to educate new,
I would have never met you, Guard, if I had gotten
I know. I should have been going down to Fee a few years earlier. Then I would have met you. You know, I should have been down there earlier.
No, I mean, I say if I'd never discovered libertarianism and all this horror stuff that we're living under, I wouldn't have met you.
Oh, I see. Yes, yes.
That's absolutely. One of the benefits of the whole libertarian movement is the people that you meet along the way. It's
that's true. And by the way,
it's an honor to know you.
It is. And I want to thank you again for what you've done so far to try to help Ian. You know, there's a direct connection. Like I said, Ian and Mark, his radio business partner, came to my mom's memorial service. They traveled over half the state just to be there. That's the kind of person you've been trying to help. That's a good guy.
So. It's a travesty of justice. It's just a horror story. That for a lawyer, one of the worst nightmares is when the thought of an innocent person serving time in a penitentiary, and I have absolutely no doubts. We're talking about Ian Freeman, is an innocent man, and as you know, I've written many articles on FFF's website that establish his innocence. But he's sitting there in the penitentiary because of this idiotic war on drugs and war on Bitcoin and all the things that are destroying our liberty and have destroyed our liberty. Yeah,
it's funny. Well, you got me thinking of the first time I met Ian. I'll just leave it at that. Jacob, thank you for everything. Great stuff. And we'll talk to you, maybe next week, the week after, we'll talk about part 3. We'll go into maybe the Zapruder film or another section you want to discuss with people. We'll make sure these are all lined up for people at my Substack and the Rumble channel as well. We'll make sure they're out there for everybody.
Sounds good.
All right, Jacob. Thank you so much.
Greatly enjoyed it as always.
Yeah, I swear, if I were working at Star Trek, I'd be naming a character after you, but it's a little beyond my time.
Until next, let me do it. Okay.
There you go.
There you
go.
It.
Jacob, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Jacob Hornberger, everybody. Great stuff from Jacob. Good man. And we're going to close off the show. I want to get some of your thoughts on this and the large things that we're faced in our time as well, these big issues. So let's go with the Mind Meld, and we'll come back and close off the show.